Why has it always got to be at night? He asked the old-fashioned coach as they hurried over the bridge. It's only fair, James. Hidden by darkness, buried in blackness. Your appearances mean nothing there. Only your soul. James shuddered. That was what he was afraid of. It wasn't long before they reached the tunnel. Even before he was inside, James heard the most horrible groans, as if he was about to enter the mouth of a beached whale. Still, he finally realized how important this really was. He raced into the tunnel. The whale choked on his smoke. James watched as the bricks flew by. He tried not to look too closely, but he was sure they'd come to life again. But that was the least of his worries. He was petrified of what he'd see when he exited the other end, and most of all, what might happen to him. The tunnel seemed to run even longer than last time. James had the horrible feeling that he wasn't going straight, that he was making turns. He even felt a set of points once. Was he even facing north anymore? He couldn't help but consider turning back, but he remembered Edward's words. He tried to make himself believe them. I am passionate. I am bold. I am single-minded.
You are disposable.
No, I'm wide awake. No, you can't follow me here.
You're replaceable, James.
I am irreplaceable.
You're easily discarded. A cheap tool substituted at the first sign of trouble. Nobody will protect you. Nobody will find you worth saving. If you want to survive, you'll have to save yourself.
You're wrong.
You'll have to turn back.
I won't.
No one will care when you're gone.
Edward will care. James's eyes were shut tight. No use in looking anyway. He turned his energy inward and thought deeply. He thought about Edward's kind words. And then he thought about Henry, and how despite everything, he'd been so worried when he hadn't returned home. And Henry cares. He went back further in his memory. He reflected upon his first day on the island, how he sat in squalor in that field, shredded grass and cow pies caught in his scorched brakes. He remembered hearing footsteps through the torn-up underbrush, nice shoes on muddy ground, and at last, Topham Hatt came into view for the first time. He looked down at James, who felt pathetic and helpless, a failure and a fool. And despite the scowl on Hatt's face and the stress in his eyes, his first words to the strange engine were,
Are you all right?
Are you all right? The Fat Controller cares. I am valuable. I am worth saving. I am worth something beyond this bloody paint. And you can't make me think otherwise.
Can't I? You deceive yourself. There's a word for engines like you, James.
Then just bloody say it.
Coward!
The tunnel opened up. The sounds of war forced their way into earshot. James shot out of the tunnel and into the rugged, unforgiving trench. Bullets and grenades and even some cannon fire formed a fiery ceiling just above his dainty whistle. James saw the clearing ahead, the flat land where the trench would offer no protection, and where he'd come face to face with this war for the first time.
I know I've got to go on. I know that. But...
The brakes screeched on, and James skidded to a stop. He was much further this time. A few more feet, and he'd be out in the open. His funnel was already peeking over the wall.
Everything in me is telling me no. This will destroy me.
The war's over, James. It's been for decades. James was really relieved to have Edith's company again, but the fear still raced through his boiler tubes. This is a painful memory, a phantom. None of this can hurt you now. But James just gulped, and then mumbled miserably.
It didn't hurt me then.
Edith squinted, surprised. I beg your pardon. This branch line has decided to show you a battlefield. It's forcing you to relive your worst moment.
You're right. It is my worst moment. But not in the way you think.
James had never sounded more ashamed in his life. He couldn't be lower.
James, how did you spend the First World War? The war that ruined this branch line. The war that cost so many boys in this region their lives. What was it like for you?
I can't.
You must be honest, James. The branch line demands honesty, a true reflection.
I won't.
You must. Please! Speak the truth!
I didn't serve! I burst a cylinder in the first week of the war, and I didn't leave the works until it was over. I just couldn't do it. While everyone else worked themselves to the frames with troop trains and munitions loads and all the other vital goods, I cowered in the very back corner of Horwit, in the darkness, and I waited for it all to stop. I wanted to help. I wanted to lessen the burden. But the heavy trains, the low maintenance, the work, I just couldn't do it. I didn't want to wear out like the others. I didn't want to fall in the line of duty. I didn't want to be disposable.
At that moment, the fierce winds swirling around them stopped. The roaring tides calmed again, and the gunfire ceased in totality. And James was left in silence, with nothing but his thoughts, his shame, and his bitter tears.
Move forward, James. Into the open. Into the light.
James managed a deep, shaky breath, and then rolled slowly forward, out of the trench. At last, he could see the battlefield. He could see the brutality, the loss of life. It must have been thousands of young men, all slain in the service of their country. James saw himself in every one of them. They suffered the fate that he hadn't dared to. Perhaps in a different way, in a different place, but they were all victims of the same war. Victims of their duty.
They're all Sudrians, aren't they?
Not just Sudrians. They were all Arlesborough boys. They called this part of the island their home, but they never made it back here. They died in another country, far from their families, far from everything they knew and loved.
Heavens.
I think it's time they came home. Don't you, James?
If only.
But it wasn't a fantasy, for as James looked around, he realized to his shock that the soldiers were slowly rising from the ground. As more and more came to their feet, they began to walk toward the coach. James could see their young faces as they passed him by.
You were young too, James. Nobody can blame you for being terrified, especially on a railway that saw you as replaceable.
You don't blame me?
No, James, I don't. And neither does the branch.
Then why put me through this? Why did it choose to show me this vision of all visions?
This branch lost itself to war, James. A war you've repressed for over 30 years. You couldn't respect its trauma until you faced your own.
I understand now.
I get it. And he did.
James looked back to watch the soldiers taking their seats. Amazingly, despite hundreds and hundreds of them having lined up, only a few dozen were still to board. Once the last boy entered, he waved appreciatively to James and shut the door tight.
All right then. To Arlesborough.
Steam welled in James's anxious boiler. He forced it into his cylinders with a will, and slowly his wheels ground forward. But to his surprise, the coach was heavier than before, and not just a little heavier. It was heavier than any train he'd pulled this week, and those were made up of 7 or 8 modern carriages. As he struggled and panted forward, He debated whether this train was even heavier than the express. It was almost impossible to get started, but he did. He had always pictured souls as light, fluffy things that just floated there, but in reality, their weight was unparalleled. James thumped past unkept foliage and crumbling railway facilities, old buildings reclaimed by nature, half-collapsed chimneys, and abandoned railway stock all adorned the side of the line. It was hard to know how far he was. Despite his earlier lies, he had never been to the top of this branch.
Edith, are we getting close?
Yes, James. It's not far now. Keep going.
Too late to stop now.
We have passengers aboard. Edith gave a respectful smile
as the two crawled under a corroded signal gantry
and into the yard of the top station. The platform was tired and faded, tumbling to pieces around the edges. The station windows had been broken and the building had been scavenged from, but the soldier boys didn't seem to mind. When James came to a halt at the platform at last, they all rushed out of the carriage with excitement. Hurrying through the station thoroughfare, at last they returned to the town of their birth. James's eyebrows perked up when he heard a thunderous noise, and actually, it was the only pleasant noise he'd heard on this line. It was cheering, and not just that of the boys, but of the mothers and fathers and siblings, families reunited in the life after, their cries so relieved and full of emotion that they nearly brought James to tears. He couldn't see any of it. The town wasn't visible from where he was sitting, and chillingly, James doubted he'd see anything anyway. But even then, his heart was warmed. He'd given great service. He had done his duty.
Edward has to do this every month?
Edith sighed. There are many more, James. The war claims so many, and each one must get home, one way or the other. One day, the token may finally rest in peace with its passengers, but for now, it must ride again. James was saddened by that realization, but he couldn't agree more.
The journey back down the branch line was so different than coming up. James had found the turntable, and embarrassingly, there wasn't a single bush or branch blocking it. You couldn't miss it. How foolish he must have sounded to Edward, with that half-baked excuse he'd made. James couldn't help but feel he'd been very immature, not just throughout this ordeal, but for his whole life up until this point. He'd never faced something with this much severity. He'd always shrunk away from such challenges. But now he had. Now, he understood fully how Edward felt, and why he had been so worn out that night. It was getting dark at the big station. The station lights still swayed in the ocean breeze, and their glow still bathed the station in a comfortable orange. They didn't really reflect as strikingly across Edward's paintwork. It was too worn and sooty for that. He really was due for a repaint and an overhaul. James hadn't been all wrong when he called him old and weak, but he'd have to wait a little bit longer. The railway wasn't made of money, after all. Edward had no train, but he did have a good reason for being there. Slowly, the station had cleared out. Gordon had left with his evening train, and Henry had retired early for the night. But Edward stayed, and he would stay as long as he had to, until James came home. When the red engine's whistle sounded tiredly through the night air, Edward smiled broadly. He had made it, and he knew James had made it, because he pulled into the station facing forwards. "Well done, James! Very well done!" James was still panting. He couldn't respond right away, so he just smiled at Edward. When he finally caught his breath, he wheezed. "You were right." Edward grinned. He looked just a little bit smug. "About which thing?" "All of it. About the train, about the branch, and about me." "I appreciate you saying that. But I was wrong about one thing." "Oh? And what's that?" "I told you the other night that you could never handle this train like I can. And yet, here you are. You faced your greatest fears." "It wasn't easy. Not at all." James paused for a moment, and then, looked empathetically at his friend.
Is that what you have to do? Every time you take this train?
Edward sighed knowingly. I faced my deepest fears many years ago, James. Your fears can only harm you if you deny them. It gives them the edge. That branch line has no more surprises left for me. I've mastered it. James looked away sadly. I don't think I could ever do that, Edward. I don't think I could be totally honest with myself. I'd go mad. There are some things I just have to believe about myself. I know that, James. It's who you are. It's how you've survived in life. To tell you the truth, honesty isn't all it's cracked up to be. Honesty is painful. I wish I could turn a blind eye to parts of myself. Uh-huh. Like your, advanced age? Very funny. Okay, but on a serious note, you don't think I'm getting crow's feet, do you? You mean smile lines? Whatever. Have I got them or not? You want honesty? Sure, I can handle a little. You've had crow's feet for the last 20 years. Well, this conversation is over. I've got to get some rest after all. But I'll see you tomorrow, Edward. See you tomorrow, James. And well done. Yeah. So James began to huff away. But before he left earshot, he stopped again and looked back at Edward. Oh, and, Yes, James? I love you too, Edward. Edward smiled broadly. His old eyes twinkled with tenderness. Well then, that's one fear alleviated. James left Edith at the platform. He figured her and Edward had some catching up to do. As James rumbled off to the sheds, he thought back. It had been a very trying week. James had rarely taken the difficult path in his life. Even more rarely had he confronted his own inner demons. But he'd done so now, and he was proud of it. That being said, he didn't care to make a tradition of it. For you see, in a strange way, James is defined by his delusions. He remade himself from the ground up a long time ago, and that's the way he wants to stay. He's happy to be James the Red Engine, one of Sodor's finest passenger engines. But, very, very occasionally, he must remember where he came from. He has to revisit those painful memories because, much like a worn-down branch line, if he doesn't go there sometimes, it may just destroy him.